the Communist Front, who Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, was a member of and is still a member of, which was a front for the Cuban intelligence controlled then by the KGB.
But we don't want tampons in the men's room. We don't want all of this DEI bullshit and critical race theory and all of this stuff. And it all starts from that place of what you're saying. Well, we just want common sense. Don't treat people like crap. Most people can agree with that. The problem is you make people, the pendulum swings the other way. When, and like, listen, I remember, do you know who Richard Spencer is? You mentioned Eric Stryker.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
I remember seeing an interview with Richard Spencer in like 2017 and 2018. And the interviewer asked them, they're like, you're seeing a lot of like people in your groups, your numbers are growing. What do you think the big reason is? And he's like, Black Lives Matter. It's that simple. Sure. We're the counter to them. When you constantly demonize white people, you're going to get pushback. Same's true with LGBT shit. You constantly shove this down people's throat, there's going to be a pushback. If they would have never shoved it down people's throat, if it would have stopped at gay marriage, I think the issue would be settled. I don't think people would much give a shit. But the problem was it kept going. The slippery slope kept going. And now people are so tired of it. The people that were like, see, that's why we need to get rid of gay marriage. Now they're sounding more reasonable. And so that's where I see these cultural issues. I would rather not get involved. Like, do I give a shit that Colin Kaepernick knees at the national anthem? Not really. What I give a shit about is that it becomes this whole thing, and it becomes this, you ought to be ashamed of your country, and white people have to be ashamed, and hands up, don't shoot, and now we got these riots, but that's just the language of the unheard, and all of this stuff, and you're like, you can't help as even as a normie to be like, I'm so tired of this shit. Like, I'm just tired of it. And that's what happened. The Democrats overplayed their hand. You're even seeing reports. And I know I'm talking a lot, so I'll ask you about this.
Go ahead.
I'm seeing reports today that with Trump's executive order ending DEI, and I know this isn't your forte, but so Trump's executive order is ending DEI. There's a lot of companies that it's being reported secretly are like, whew, because they felt hostages, like we have to go along with it or we'll get eaten alive. So every major company has to have an HR that's prioritizing the trans, lesbian, woman of color, and it's like, now that they have an excuse, well, the government says we can't do it. Whoo! And I do think that that's a lot of the reasons that that Trump won the popular vote. Yes, it has to do with the economy. Yes, it has to do with the border. But those cultural issues mattered. And I think you're seeing a lot of people that were sort of like you, that were like, look, there's some things about Trump I like. There's some things about I don't like. Some things about the Democrats I like. Some things I don't. That are like, but I just think that the Democrats and the left are becoming too crazy. They're becoming too insane. And I think that it's not that they're becoming too, yes, you could point to it like with their border policy. But it's not that. They're becoming too insane with a trans person shoots someone and everyone has to be like, well, we can't see the manifesto and they were a victim too. And at some point the average person's just like, no, like this is crazy. So like, do you think that has to do with like why people are migrating more towards like Trump?
Well, this is an interesting history. I mean, I've done a little reading on it. You have to look at the intentions of some of these leaders within the quote-unquote cultural left. Some people call them cultural Marxists. I know you addressed this in a recent show of yours and whatnot. There is some, and I am dead centrist on this particular issue. I think sometimes the problem is you have one side on the left that is shitting all over Christians and all Christians. Not all Christians are fascists. Some of my closest friends are Christians. And I know people like, oh, you always say that. That's such a cliche. No, I've met a number of Christians. They're not all fascists. They have varying different beliefs towards differing people, including political and economic beliefs and whatnot. This is some of the salt of the earth people, just like gay people that I met are also salt of the earth too as well. It all depends. This is where it comes down to people are individuals and whatnot. And there are people in the trans community. I know you don't have particularly good relations with her, Brianna Wu. She has taken a stance against the left, and I appreciate that. Because she gets shit on by those tanky motherfuckers and Marxists and Islamists and whatnot. And whatever her reasons, I extend my solidarity to such individual because you want a normie politics. Now let's take a look at some of the views, and I could send them to you privately if you want. I kid you not. I enjoy working out. I love paddleboard. I love windsurfing. I'm a late bloomer when it comes to sports because I sucked at sports, but the last few years I've turned around. So I come across this essay by a doctor, female, who said, I kid you not, this is batshit crazy. Men working out is basically misogynistic, anti-feminist oppression. You don't believe me? If you want me to pull it up and I can read passages, I'd be happy to do that if that's okay with you.
You can't, I believe you 100%, though. I mean,
no, seriously. This is a doctor. You have communist leaders, and this is the height of hypocrisy. And I'm going to write in it. I have a paper eventually with notes called "Warning to the Wokists: Abandon Communism."
Right.
Starting in the 1930s, you had Willy Munzenberg, who was a Comintern operative, who was affiliated with the German Communist Party. And he talked about, and Rudi Dutschke, who was a West German new leftist revolutionary from the late 1960s, who talked about essentially the long march through the institutions of using culture as well as class struggle to collapse the West and collapse liberalism, to make culture in the West so rotten and whatnot to achieve a communist totalitarian revolution. So what happens after the revolution in these communist states? People's Republic of China, they throw alongside Christians in concentration camps femboys and outlaw moderately pro-LGBT movies like Brokeback Mountain. In North Korea, back in the 1930s, a North Korean Pyongyang hospital director was interviewed saying, oh, there's no gay people in North Korea. Or in Cuba, the Communist Front Venceremos Brigade, who Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, was a member of and is still a member of, which was a front for the Cuban intelligence controlled then by the KGB. Cuba was virulently anti-LGBTQ until they opportunistically changed their tune because it made that government look so horrible and vicious. The DGI was like, oh, and the KGB was like, we're going to use the LGBTQ members of the Venceremos brigades to penetrate the United States, access government, and to use them to speed up the bourgeois degeneracy in the United States. So it's like, this is, I have to implore any leftists in the show, the communists, the Marxist-Leninists, they're not gone. They're full of shit. Whatever criticisms they may have that might be correct, as Rob and I talked about, they're full of shit. They are the worst hypocrites. They will smile to your face and they will slit your fucking throats. And that's what it comes down to. So a lot of these people, when you peek beneath the curtain, actually what they say, it's like, it's just like, wow, because it goes beyond let's get along, let's unite as Americans of good faith, the Rob Noors, the Brianna Woos, the whatever, oppose totalitarianism and whatnot. But there's always a different agenda. The agenda is never just rights. One more point before you continue. There is an article by, I think, Norma Markowitz in the People's Daily World, which is the publication of the Communist Party USA. And it was very revealing. And Ms. Markowitz talked about basically beyond the veil, shitting all over the Mattachine Society before it moved to the left, saying it was the AFL or NAACP of the LGBTQ movement, which in commie speak means, well, she said basically they were conservative and just preoccupied with rights, but the communists well, we're for class struggle and liberation, and basically screw those people on the conservative side that were fighting the rights. And I think this is where people like you or I may need to educate people, because the real enemy is not each other. The real enemies are plutocratic corruption from private sector oligarchs who we don't want to exterminate, but we want to use reform. I'm an institutionalist and a populist, but also at the same time, it is portions of the extreme left. One more thing before you go. You think these groups are small and insignificant? Look at how DSA is involved, even in Congress. You look at their plans to turn red Republican Texas to red blue. The DSA leaders talked about that. You look at my late friend from the PCUSA. Well, down in Florida, the small PCUSA had a member on the water board in the Tampa-Hillsborough County area. So much for a small group. I know people think, oh, Nevin, you're a right-wing nut, but they're organized.
So, and in academia, too, right? It's not just like it's rife in academia. You know, I got like 10 more minutes, so I don't know how much longer you can stay, but you brought up Brianna Wu, and you brought up the idea, which I think that part of her change, or at least it's a question I have that I think it'd be interesting to get your take on, the idea of opportunism, right? Like, I think that Brianna is a shrewd political actor. I think she's involved. You know, I've read her explanation of what her change was, and maybe you haven't read everything I have. Maybe you've read more, and you have more of her explanation. But for those not in the know, she's not only been pushing back on what many would consider the more radical left on the Israel-Palestine situation, but she's been pushing back on, as a member of the trans community, on more radical members of the trans community, saying like, listen, and you've seen this from other Democrats. And I saw her explanation of when she had the change, which leads me to believe that it has more to do with opportunism than a heartfelt change. And that was because she's involved in various political PACs and whatever. She had access to polling data going straight to the DNC and Democratic candidates. And she realized how crushed they were getting on the trans issue. And to me, for her to say that was my wake-up moment, that's not I realized that they were saying things I disagreed with. That is, I realized that what they're saying is going to cost us in elections. And that's a difference. And this, now I don't want to make it about Brianna, but I think there's a greater context here, right? For example, you could also say the same thing at a much higher scale of a lot of these tech people. All of a sudden, people like Bezos and Zuckerberg are showing up at Trump's inauguration. You have people like Sam Altman that did ChatGPT, who used to write favorably on Twitter about supporting Reid Hoffman to take down Trump. Now he's a Trump buddy. At what point? Because there's clearly a point where you have to say, well, part of the goal is to welcome people that formerly disagreed with you, right? And say, yes, we're glad that you've seen the light. We want people, and I don't just mean political, even for people like me and you, maybe someone in a different audience that disagrees with us that comes over. There has to be a line where, of course, we welcome that. But how do you differentiate from that and people that are just being opportunistic? And they're like, we see an advantage here. Like you said earlier, people talking about cultural issues to sort of shoehorn in economic policies or something like that would benefit themselves and screw over people. What's your advice or what's your thoughts on how you evaluate, like, what should we think? If you're a Trump supporter, what should you think of Zuckerberg? What should you think of Bezos? What should you think of Sam Altman? Is it just, no, screw you, you were against us, and so we'll never accept you? Or can you say, look, there is room for real change?
Yeah, I mean, with Bezos, Zuckerberg, and whatnot, they're looking at the benefits of crony deregulation and union busting that could potentially come from the Trump administration. Their concerns are material. They are economic globalists. Globalism is driven by uncontrolled, globalized capitalism, and that's the issue. Globalism is real. I'm not against, obviously, multinational corporations as an entity, but they obviously need, at times, oversight when it conflicts with the nation state. I have concerns about the Trump administration that they're going to get compromised, that the populism and nationalism is going to get compromised. We could have a different show if you want to have me back, or you come on my show.
Yeah,
We can talk
I
about
would.
that. With Brianna, I don't know her. I've seen her. She follows me on Twitter, which I really appreciate. I follow her. She strikes me as, at least, because again, I don't know her personally. When I see in her Twitter feed, she gets a ton of horrible shit from Marxist Leninists.
Yes.
And that is costly, and they are nasty motherfuckers. They are horrible to her. I know she's had interviews, I believe, on other channels with other people where she has pushed back and whatnot. I give her credit. What her motivations are, I don't know. I'm not friends with her. I don't know her. I've never talked with her like I'm talking with you, or I talk with Connor or Econo Boy, where we have these long form conversations. But
well, let me say this: I'm not asking for like any moral proclamation on her. I'm just more of using her as sort of that example, because I think there is, right, like, but there's an even more fundamental problem that comes with it. Like, for example, let's say you're a Christian nationalist, or that has a, actually, I won't even use that because that has connotations maybe beyond what I'm trying to say. Let's say you are a Republican who is heavily Christian and conservative, right? And you want the Republican Party, okay, fiscal conservatism, but what you're really concerned about is like conservative values, pro-life, etc., right? And you're against gay marriage, right? And in order to win the election, MAGA's sort of become more of a big tent party, right? Now you have gay people in his administration, and now you have, maybe policy, Trump pissed off a lot of pro-life people by coming out saying I wouldn't be for a national ban. 3 days before the election, I'm talking to a friend of mine, Andrew Wilson. Sorry, I got the snaggy cough. And he's 3 days before an election, he's like basically flipping out about like gay people that support Trump and Republicans. And I'm like, now's not the time for that. 3 days before an election, we want to win the election. But their point is, well, if winning means that we become something fundamentally different, is it worth winning? And so they feel that by bringing in people, so let's say we bring in Zuckerberg. Sorry here.
You want to drink?
Is it worth it? I am going to get a drink.
Water?
I'll leave you answer this, and I'll grab a drink. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I got to get a drink of water too, actually, because I had a little something caught in my throat. Let's take a little break.
Yeah. What the heck is happening to me?
Hold on. Let's get a drink of water.
I'll be right back.
Too. I had something a little.
Someone put a hex on me or something. Someone put a hex on me.